You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith. You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Hindu. Why aren't you a Hindu? Because you happen to have been brought up in America, not in India. There's no particular reason to pick on the Judeo-Christian God in which, by the sheerest accident, you happen to have been brought up and ask me the question, what if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong about the great juju at the bottom of the sea?
And you remember that glorious night on Christmas night, I think it was in the latter part of the 60s, when the Apollo astronauts had gone through the dark side of the moon and had fired their rockets to be on their homeward journey. They were vouchsafed a glimpse of this universe that no human eye had ever seen before. And as they fired those rockets, they saw Earth rise over the horizon of the moon, draped in a beauteous mixture of blue and white, garlanded by the glistening light of the sun. At that moment, getting this awesome glimpse, which I said no other human had ever visioned, they did not know how to respond to it. All of a sudden, seeing this glorious sight, overwhelmed by it, there was only one way for them to begin. It was with the words, "In the beginning, God."
Settle down. Woo! All right, well, tonight we start a 3-week series, and I have good news and bad news for you. And which do you want to hear?
Bad news first.
Bad?
Bad news for both.
You have to hear me blabber 3 consecutive times.
Called it.
But what?
Called it.
The good news is you won't have to listen to me for another 28 days after tonight. So we start again on the 29th, and then we come back on July 6th as well. And the series that we are doing is on apologetics. And I don't think that's a word that a lot of us are familiar with. It's not like I walk around Madison and go up to people and apologize to them for my faith. It's more like a defense of the faith sort of thing. And in order to understand how to defend the faith, we have to understand what faith actually means. And we're nerds, so we go to the dictionary. The American Heritage Dictionary states that faith is belief that does not rest on logical proof or material evidence. And Mark Twain said, faith is believing something you know ain't true. Is there another word that we can substitute for faith? One author of the Bible seemed to think so. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. A lot of pet peeves. Kind of like when you're at a public restroom and you're just kind of sitting there minding your own business in a stall, and all of a sudden there's a fully orchestrated 4th of July celebration going on in the stall next to you. I mean, there's like stuff flying around everywhere. It's like the toilet's, being barraged or something like that. And then they get done, and then they go and they don't even wash their hands after. Now that's sick. So that's one pet peeve. It's like when you're at a Brewers game, and they're playing the Cardinals, and there's a half a dozen drunk Cubs fans sitting behind you. It's like, seriously, just stay in Chicago. We don't need you at Cardinals games. But I think my biggest pet peeve is when I'm listening in on a conversation between a Christian and an atheist. The atheist backs the Christian into a corner with science and reason, and the Christian simply throws up his arms and says, I just take that by faith. And the subtle admission that the Christian is making there is that, here's faith and here's logic, and you can't ever bridge the gap. You can't have a reasonable faith. But the truth is that all worldviews, including atheistic ones, require faith. And so do most of the facts that we take for granted. We exercise faith every day. For instance, when you came in here, before you sat down, your brain whizzed through 100 different scenarios, and you sat down on the chair. You didn't know for a fact that the chair would support your weight, but you considered a bunch of factors, like how much you ate for supper, and that matters with me because I eat a lot. how much you weigh and your past experiences with chairs. And so you had to place faith in the chair. I don't know. Well, anyway, the problem that I see in America today, and particularly among young people, is that instead of coming to the faith via the bridge of reason, many of us are taking leaps of faith. So I want to ask you to consider what you believe, and why do you believe what you believe? Notice how the question supposes that you have a reason for your belief. So what is the reason? If it's simply because your parents are Christians, I don't think that's a good enough reason, because there are Hindus, Jews, and Muslims who grew up in Hindu, Jewish, and Muslim homes. And would it be a good reason for them to believe what they believe because of their parents? You can't have it both ways. Or suppose your faith is based on some type of comfort factor. It's nice being a Christian when a lot of your friends claim to be Christians as well. But it's also nice being a Cleveland Browns fan when all the people around you are Cleveland Browns fans as well, because that doesn't make them the best football team in the NFL. In the same way, your feeling of comfort has nothing to do with the legitimacy of your religion. Or suppose your faith is based completely on a single experience that you had with God. The nature of experiences is that a single contrary experience can overturn your evidence. And if that's the only reason you have faith, what happens when your best friend is struck with cancer, or you lose a brother or sister? If one experience outweighs the other, then your experience-based faith will crumple like the dollar bill it is worth. Now, these are all instances of leaps of faith. But if your faith is based on good reason, then you're not only justified in holding that faith, but you can also communicate it with other people. And that brings us to the goal of our entire series. Matthew 22 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and with all your mind." God doesn't want you to take an irrational leap of faith, and neither do I. So my goal in this series is to kind of take you by the hand and guide you down the bridge from reason to faith. For those of you who have already exercised faith in God, I'd like to strengthen your faith and give you some ammunition in sharing it with others. But I recognize that there might also be some people who have some major questions about God's existence and about the truth claims of Christianity. And so I really want to speak to you guys with gentleness and respect, and to really kind of give you some of the reason for the hope that we have as Christians. And so the structure of these talks is going to be long and kind of lecture-like, and this one could be quite long, so you're in for the ride of your life. But so prepare yourselves. So for those of you who are in college, think power lecture, and for those of you who are still in high school, think 0-hour Spanish at 7 o'clock in the morning with senior fling. I don't think these talks will be boring, but they'll make you think, so you're going to have to pay attention if you want to get anything out of them. And I'd like to tell you, first of all, that I don't know everything, so don't assume that I know everything. In fact, I'm not an expert on most of the matters on which I'm going to speak tonight. But I have done a great deal of research on this, and I'm drawing from dozens of reliable sources, so don't feel like you can't come to me afterwards, or even come up to me and I'll give you my notes, or I'll give you a cheat sheet or something nerdy like that. So before we take this first step on the bridge, we're confronted with a major roadblock, and that's the question, does God even exist? As if the picture right there didn't answer the question. For centuries, the greatest minds the world has ever seen have debated the question back and forth. Nonetheless, I feel there's outstanding evidence in favor of God's existence. I'm not going to invoke the name of God until we're quite a ways through, but I think that's important when we're establishing the Christian worldview, because we have to start from the bottom up. So before we begin, I'd like to open this up in prayer.